How's everyone doing? This is Steve Weintraub with Collider, and I am super happy to have director Bill Condon here in the studio with us.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you so much for coming in the studio. Every other interview we've done has been in a hotel room.
I know, and it's impressive, this place that you've built. It's incredible.
It's a team effort.
Good.
Thank you to everyone who works at Collider for making something like this possible.
Right.
And our great owners.
Right.
I want to start by saying how much I enjoyed this movie.
Great.
And I want to commend you, New Line, Warner Brothers, for making this kind of adult thriller, which is really hard to make nowadays.
Yeah, it's hard to get made. Yeah, absolutely. And kudos to them for making it and for promoting it and really getting behind it. You know, I think everyone there and we all believe that there's a big underserved audience of grown-ups who want an entertaining film. This is truly in the Hitchcock tradition, so it's something that an audience of a certain age, I think, understands because they grew up with it. But I have to say, I hope, it's a movie with older actors in which there's no talk of being sick or anybody dying, it has none of those tropes of movies that, an 80-year-old actor like Ian would typically be in. These are characters who are fully committed to pulling off something that they would have been doing when they were, in the prime of life. So I think it has that vitality that I hope can translate to, an audience beyond just the people who are, attracted to these actors.
100%. And I'll tell you, after seeing it, I completely agree and think that the film does that. The thing about this is also, listen, everyone loves Helen. Yeah. Everyone loves Ian. You've worked with Ian before,
yes,
just a few years ago. How is it getting him in this? Was it as simple as like a text message, being like, I have a project that I think you'd be good in?
Right. It's funny because he's always said, just send it to me and I'll do it, And then when you actually do send it to him, then it takes a lot of convincing. And on this one, he said, God, it is a hell of a part. But I could tell he was a little concerned at the idea of playing a villain again. He'd made a career, he's the great Shakespeare actor of his generation, but many of those parts were villains, So he'd made a career well into middle age of indelibly playing these villains. And then, decided to become a movie star, really pursued it, and it happened, especially with Lord of the Rings, where he's Gandalf, where he's this great twinkly character who's actually closer to who he really is. So I think he had a slight misgiving about going to the dark side again, just for a moment. I think it's just that thing of, it's more fun to be beloved, it's more fun when you take the curtain call to be, cheered instead of being hissed, But he got over that. Again, recognizing what a good part it was and the possibility to work with Helen again.
I was going to say, I understand his hesitation for the villain thing, but it's such a good role.
It is. It really is.
Yeah. So obviously you're a screenwriter. You're a very talented screenwriter. But did you rewrite this or you just?
No. Jeffrey Hatcher wrote the script. He'd written the script to Mr. Holmes, and believe me, I and the producer Greg Yolen were heavily involved in what feels like 168 drafts of it. So we really got in there with them. But no, it's all Jeffrey's work. He's brilliant, and he's an incredible Anglophile, which made him so right for both this and Mr. Holmes. He just has this way of speaking and thinking like a British person, and this is ultimately a movie that we made in England that is a contemporary English movie.
Talk a little bit about, how did the script get changed once you have people like Ian and Helen coming on board, and maybe you're doing a read-through and you're hearing their voices?
Yeah, well, a few ways. One of them, Helen, when I first met her, there was a chunk of the script, and it's a little hard to talk about because, as with all things in this movie, you don't want to give anything away. But at a certain point, the movie sort of refers back to events in the Second World War. And in the novel, that had all been connected to the Holocaust. And it had been bothering me, and I couldn't put my finger on what it was. And when I met with her for the first time, she said, I love the script, and it is a wonderful entertainment, but don't you think it's time to stop using the Holocaust in this context? In other words, it wasn't something that was attempting to shine a new light on what happened in the Holocaust, and I thought it was an exactly right point. point, you know? So we shifted that into, you know, again, without giving away any specifics, what it was like to be a survivor of that war as a German who had to live through both the end of the war and the arrival of the Russians and the deprivation that followed, which closely mirrored Helen's life because she grew up, I mean, she was born just before the war ended and grew up in a London that was a life of complete deprivation. So it was a great single note, and it made a great contribution to the script. Ian throughout, both of them, you know, they're both so smart, you know, and Ian loves a puzzle. So that was the reason for all the, you know, the rewrites, because it is so intricate and so carefully built. You know, you'd always find somebody who'd say, "But what about?" And it's like, "Oh God, we didn't think of that," you know. And Ian had a few of them, you know, so he was very helpful that way.
Yeah, but you know, I think that's great. Because one of the things I found that I really enjoyed about the movie is it all made sense and it all connected, and those people bringing up the "but what abouts."
Yeah.
You know, if you can fix things that are leaking water, it makes the film that much stronger.
It does. And to that point, you know, that is the thing. Helen was really game for this. There are some things you just don't know, right? You know, you just don't know how much the audience should know at a certain point until you put it together. So she was always saying, you know. We'd had a discussion early on and said, "Hey, Bill, do you think I should do one where I just give a little more of it away here?" And she would do it, you know. And we actually shot a few scenes where we revealed one of the twists somewhat earlier, just thinking maybe the audience would be ahead of us, and we had to do that earlier. And so that was a great luxury in editing, you know, which, as you know, is the last chance to write something, but where we could put it all together, put it in front of people, and finally figure out, really fine-tune it, to figure out how we could lead the audience through this intricate story.
Well, you bring up editing, and I was going to get there anyway, but this is one of those films where I would imagine you do have to test it and show it to people to figure out how much information are you giving out at a certain point.
Exactly.
When is the audience too ahead of the film?
That's right.
All that stuff. So how many early screenings did you do, and what did you learn?
I do a lot of them with friends. I do, you know, I have them over into the, you know, a room like this and sedate people there and then ask them questions for a half hour. And did it, I have to say, even after we locked the picture, I suddenly had a new take on the opening, and I did it again with a group of 10 friends. But with groups of people, we only did three actually, two official and one with a group of friends, you know, 100 people or so. The great thing there was, when I read this novel, there was one scene where the twist really is revealed. The main twist is revealed. And I remember getting to that point in the book and thinking, I want to make this movie because I want to see that scene play in front of an audience. And last night we did a screening at the Landmark, and again, it's only the fourth time I've seen it with a group of people, but each time there is this visceral kind of reaction to it, which is a real treat.
Yeah, I didn't see it with a big room like that. I would imagine, I would imagine it plays a certain way. How long, I've asked you this in the past, how long was your first cut compared to the finished film?
Oh, that is a good question. You know, I would say 2 hours and 5, and then the movie with end credits is 1 hour and 49. So that's a lot. That's
I mean, but was that like
20 minutes, I would say.
Sure, but is that like an assembly cut, or was that like a cut you were pretty happy with?
No, that was an assembly. Yeah,
Got it.
The cut I was happy with probably had another 5 minutes in it.
So what was the last thing that you cut out before picture locking?
Well, it was actually this opening. We'd originally opened with a series of bad dates for both Ian and Helen. Which you then realize, you know, there was probably a kind of way for both of them to rehearse for the date that they actually had, you know, and they were funny, you know, so it was really heartbreaking to pull that out because it did. By the time then you see them with each other, which is the first scene in the movie, you've kind of gotten to know them in this very extreme circumstance of being face to face with somebody that you hate and want to get away from, you know. But it just set the wrong tone. I think it was just a little too comic for the movie that followed.
I totally want to see these scenes, though. Hopefully, when it comes out on Blu-ray,
they are there.
I was going to say that's really funny. I could imagine both of them doing that.
Oh yeah, they were both great. Yeah.
How long? Because obviously this is not a Marvel movie. This is not some huge budget
No.
film. How long? What kind of production schedule did you have?
Well, it was crazy because it was one of those movies, which I think happened. It's happened to me before, but it was more extreme here, where, in this case, again with Ian, I remember on Gods and Monsters, we had to start shooting on a certain day because he had a theatrical commitment. Same thing happened here. So, and those things are great because you put a gun to people's heads and suddenly people say yes, But I got off a plane in London and we were shooting 7 weeks later. So that was, and I loved it. We just hit the ground running. And it's all location, as you know. I mean, it's all like complicated stuff to find and then organize. And it's the best way of making a movie, Everybody just like gets in there, God, Helen was, on her grip practically, she never leaves a set. She's always there trying to help out. But it was one of those.
Sure. How many days did you have to shoot?
We shot 38.
Oh, that's also not a lot of time.
No.
What was, so you're getting ready to shoot, you got the 38 days.
Yeah.
What is the thing or things that you are most stressed out about before filming on the first day?
Oh, that's a good question. The things that I can talk about that I was most stressed
I don't want to do spoilers.
Right? Exactly. I mean, there are things that immediately come to mind. You know what it is? It's that thing that happens, and I've done it 3 times now, in London, especially to Americans, where you sort of lay out a schedule based on how you expect to do it, and everybody says that is impossible in London. You won't be able to move from here to there. You won't be able to get Helen from her trailer to the set in the time that you think you can shoot something. That everything is so hard there, everybody says. And then on the day, it turns out to be so much easier. So there are no crews that are better than British crews, but there's a kind of like worrywart, like quality to the people in charge of stuff that you have to kind of push through a little bit.
Sure. What is it like actually filming with the two of them on location? Because they're both huge stars.
They are, yeah.
And, both of them are loved.
Yes.
So how much is it, did you have like big crowds watching?
There were some, but I have to say it's really, again, I think because things shoot in London so much, there's sort of not a blasé attitude, but people let us be. Ian makes a point of taking the bus from where he lives all the time when he comes into Soho. He is somebody who just lives. He thrives like off of the idea that he lives like a typical Londoner and is happy to talk to anybody at all times. So I think in a weird way, people are just used to seeing him around because, especially in the locations we shot in, which are right in town, I think he's there all the time.
I got to tell you, if I saw Ian on a bus, it would do like a double take.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy. But I respect that.
I know. It's great.
Completely. Talk a little bit about with the ending. Was it always, and I don't want to do spoilers, but was it always going, there? And did you make any changes at all based on test screenings?
Going there being...
I'll take that thing back and just say, how did those early test screenings impact the overall film, and did you end up making any changes with anything in the ending?
There was one change made in the movie comes to its climax, the story is told, and then we have a little coda, of about 2 minutes, a minute with him and a minute with her. And it's one thing I really learned, and I learned it from every woman who was involved in the movie, and in the movie in post and in marketing and everything, that I thought that there was a way not to certainly redeem the Ian character, but to just show this little bit of sympathy toward him. And so in that last scene where we see what came of him, the first cut of it was a little bit more, not tender, but it suggested that this person had lived a very sad life, and isn't that a terrible thing? And women didn't want to know from that, It was very clear. It was the biggest note we got out of the first test screening, and the biggest change. And truly, it was a change of music and about 6 seconds of footage. But it really did change the tone of that last scene with him.
It's so people don't realize that that little bit of 6 seconds of footage and music can completely alter your take on a character.
It's very true.
And a movie.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Power of editing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to focus on that and thinking. Anyway,
Right.
memorable moments from filming. I'm imagining that there's like a day or two from filming that you will always remember.
Yeah, you know what it was? We, again, in this tight schedule, somehow we'd wound up, because we had built this house that much of the movie takes place in, we wound up in the last week having to do the 9-page Helen Mirren speech on one day, followed by the 6-page Ian McKellen speech on the other day. It was crazy. It was, so it was, I have to say, those 2 days, watching those, you can't imagine the stamina, the, all the pressure on them. They knew there was no choice. I still feel horrible for having put them in that position, but somehow we wound up there, and to watch them just do it, and kind of absorb the pressure and ride right over it and deliver in a crazy great way. The power of those performances on those 2 days, informed by the extra, kind of anxiety about what they had to pull off.
Yeah, I would imagine that, first of all, I would have paid to see that,
Right.
just to watch them work in that kind of a setting. But when you have actors of this caliber, do you have extra people that want to visit you on set?
That's a good question. No, not really. No, I think no.
Then you don't have the right. I mean, you need
exactly.
different friends.
And the only person who visited us was Taylor Hackford on the last day, not Helen's day, but Ian's day, and he was so sweet. He said, "Okay, I've spent 5 minutes on the set, which is the limit for what one director should spend on another director's set," and then he took off. But no, we didn't have people visiting. It was really quiet.
Oh yeah. Next time, make the call.
Yeah, exactly.
Just throwing that out there. Yeah. So talk a little bit about how is it with getting out there and promoting? Are you going all over the place? Or are you doing what's your thing?
Yeah, it's funny because it's been Mr. Holmes a few years ago, but it used to be that you would do that kind of landmark theater tour, and you'd be it's Baltimore to Detroit, and it's like you're doing like radio every day and stuff like that. But this movie, it's odd because it's made at a certain scale, but Warner's is releasing it in a completely commercial way, so that it isn't quite the grassroots kind of marketing that I've been used to for this kind of smaller movie, which is a relief, frankly, But yeah, I think it's mostly, this is really the beginning, which is why I'm so rusty right now, because I haven't done this before.
Nah, you're great.
But lucky, too, because I haven't canned my answers yet, right? But we're about to start that in London. Most of it's happening in London next week and New York the week after that.
Yeah, I actually told, my parents don't go to the movies that often, and I said to them that this would be something you would both really enjoy.
Oh, that's great. That's good.
But I feel strongly that, this is just an underserved audience.
Yeah.
And also, I moderated a screening of Official Secrets.
Right.
And at the Landmark, no less. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I found was it was packed with an older audience, and they were really asking intelligent questions, and they wanted to go to the movies.
I know. Same thing last night. No, it's great.
Yeah. So I think, anyway, that's a whole.
The only thing wrong with them is that they take their time. It's like we've got to urge them to go out the first weekend because we live in that culture now,
sure,
right?
Totally.
I mean,
yes.
it's sort of survival of the fittest, and you've sort of got to keep going. And I think everyone thinks there's plenty of time to get to it, but there's less and less these days.
Yeah, that's something I actually don't think about, but you're right. It's
an older audience, ambles to the theater a little bit.
I want to touch on a few other things real quick.
Great.
When you made Beauty and the Beast, what was the dream number at box office that you were thinking? Because it ended up at 1.26 billion,
right?
Which is a pretty big hit.
Yeah.
So were you secretly hoping, my God, can we break $1 billion, or were you like?
I wasn't really honestly thinking about that. I think it was.
Because you're in that exclusive club of making a film that made over $1 billion. And I don't know what the Twilight movies made, but they also did really well.
They did, yeah. No, but I just wanted it to, for me, the big secret agenda there, honestly, was, along with Hitchcock, I grew up, at the moment when those big roadshow musicals died, and I love them, and I was, we were all told at that point, you can't have any more of those, and to me, I was secretly making one of those movies, not a half musical, a full-on musical with 13 numbers. And I just wanted it to make its money back, honestly. And it was then the most expensive musical ever made. You know, thank God. You know, since then they just keep costing more and more. But so because I love the genre so much, all of those movies kind of carry on their shoulders the burden of the whole, you know, genre. So
Sure.
so there, that was my focus, that we make sure that, you know, it be a success and not one of those elephantine bombs that I grew up with, you know.
There was a lot of talk for a little while that you were involved with Bride of Frankenstein.
Yes.
So what ended up happening with that?
Well, that was a heartbreaker, really. We were involved. We were prepping. We were deep into it, and I have to say, the simplest way to say it is that I think the Mummy, and not to say anything against the movie, but the fact that hadn't worked for them, and it was the beginning of this whole reinvention of their monsters, gave them cold feet, you know, at the end of the day. Because David was writing the script. I thought it was unbelievably good, and we were on the verge of making a really beautiful movie, I thought. So that was a shame.
Yeah, I'm a fan of David's writing.
Yeah.
And can you tease what it was? Have you guys ever talked about what it was going to be about? Or
Well, we know he'd written it. I mean, we were prepping the movie.
no,
you
I
know?
mean, like, have you ever teased of what the movie was going to be?
Talk to
Yeah.
some. No.
Are you allowed to or no?
I don't know if I am, honestly, because David, I think, is still involved in figuring out, like, the new approach to.
Got it, yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think isn't Blumhouse doing something? The Invisible Man.
They're doing that, right?
Right.
That's the first one. The next one that they finally are yeah.
Yeah, I you know what's interesting? It's like these classic monsters are so iconic.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe, listen, I know a lot of people think, the thing about Blumhouse is they're obviously going to make it on a much smaller budget.
Right.
But maybe, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but maybe that kind of smaller budget, which allow you to make a lot more creative freedom when
Right.
you're not having to spend so much to make
You're
it.
probably exactly right. And I think, to be fair, that's probably what Universal was thinking at that time too. You know, that ultimately the movie that we started was, you know, devised as a great big movie, and at the end of the day, probably these movies should be smaller.
Well, I mean, I just look at in terms of, you know, when you have less money and
Yeah.
you're not trying to aim at 4 quadrants.
Yeah.
You know, if you're making something between 20 and 50 million, you can do a lot more with it.
very true.
You know, and really also push boundaries. You know, or
It's true, although we were doing some of that there too.
sure.
Yeah.
But I would have really liked to have, you know.
Yeah.
A while ago, I asked you about this, and I will get the update. You were linked to this Richard Pryor project.
Oh yeah.
So whatever ended up
Second
happening.
Heartbreaker. Well, that was that. When you talk about, you know, how hard it is to get movies made, I started that like right on the heels of Dreamgirls. I spent 2 years writing that. I'm really proud of that script, and it was something that was a go picture at 3 different places, 3 different times with different casts, and then there was always something that made it fall apart. I ultimately had to leave it. There were I think Lee Daniels was involved with it for a long time, and Oprah Winfrey was involved, and that fell apart. Harvey Weinstein fell apart, you know. So I don't know where it is. What's interesting, I think, is that I don't think, you know, we live in a world where I could direct that movie anymore, frankly, you know. I do think that's something that's changed, you know, probably for the better in the last 10 years, you know, that that would need, I think the feeling is that would need an African American director, you know.
I think it would be good for someone to an African American director to helmet, but I also think that well, anyway, it's just one of those projects that I just can't believe hasn't moved forward with who he is.
I know, it's a great project, and I do think there's some little curse on it or something, because the oddest things always seem to bring it down.
You were right. You were one of the people who wrote Greatest Showman. Or
Right.
am I wrong about this?
No. It's always odd for me. I always say I can't take any credit or blame for that movie, because I really came in. I'm good friends with Larry Mark, the producer, and they were. I came in for 8 weeks to kind of just shape it into a musical, you know.
Sure.
And And then it was 2 years before and I was shot Beauty and the Beast and all that before they actually shot that movie. So yes, it was fun to make that contribution to it, but I don't feel like I have the right to say I have any real authorship of it.
I completely get it. Were you surprised? I mean, because it ended up becoming a big hit.
Yeah.
Did you know when you were working on it, like, oh, this could be something?
No, because it was, when I was working on it, there were a number of composers doing songs, and Pasek and Paul had only done one song. And I think the reason it's a big hit is first and foremost them, that they wrote a number of songs that people fell in love with, and I do think if you look at this resurgence of music-driven movies and then the occasional musical that doesn't work as well as the others, it is as simple as, like, do people love the music and want to just hear it again and again? Bohemian Rhapsody, right? Or Greatest Showman, as opposed to some of the others that maybe not as much, But that to me, no, because they weren't kind of dominant then, I didn't really have a clue.
Yeah, those songs are very popular.
Yeah.
I know I'm almost out of time with you, or out of time.
No.
And I will just say that, what?
No.
Oh, I know. So I'm going to ask you a few fun questions before I get the hook from in my shoulder. What TV show would you love to guest, write, and direct?
Oh, TV show. I got to say, I'm going to rephrase the question and say, what TV show would you have loved to have written or directed?
Got it. So something in the past.
Right, and that's years and years, which I'm just obsessed with. Like Russell T Davies, who did Queer as Folk and Cucumber Banana. I think he's just a genius. But that show, as a kind of really, really, and I got to say, that and Escape from Dannemora, both of them are just, I think, just incredible, like, great arguments for how this form is fantastic when it's in those kind of hands, like the 6 hour telling a sprawling story, in the case of Years and Years, just like capturing the Trump world that we live in so brilliantly in a way that made you not be able to sleep at night. I thought it was incredible.
What movie have you seen the most?
Oh, that's a good question. I would have said Vertigo, honestly.
Okay.
Or Cabaret, maybe?
Favorite ride at Disneyland?
See, you get me in trouble because I went to Disneyland once when I moved here and I never went back. So
say no more.
Okay.
Is there anything that you collect?
Yeah, Blu-rays and DVDs.
Do you have more than 5,000?
I do. Really?
I just spoke to Bong for Parasite, and he says he has 5,000.
Right.
That's what he collects as well.
Yeah.
Do you have a number?
It's well, I have places in New York and LA, so I mean it's like double that if you add them both up. Yeah.
I got it. You basically have an unhealthy collection.
Exactly.
But by the way, there's nothing wrong with this.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people wish they had that many movies. What was the last thing that you really were obsessed with?
Oh, I remain obsessed with it. Really, honestly, the Trump story. The end of Donald Trump. That's. Yeah.
I don't want to get you in trouble. I will just say, hopefully soon. Right. What TV show have you watched all the way through more than once?
I think none, honestly. That's my biggest argument against, this eternal argument of movies against TV. I do think the 2 hour form is something that, from the beginning of time, practically, drama was something that you spent an evening doing, not 6 evenings,
Sure.
Obviously. And I mean, Sopranos being still the greatest example, and I know people who've rewatched it, but I feel like the time you spend living in that world, when you complete that, it feels completed. And it feels daunting to take up to realize you'd have to go through all the episodes that didn't work or the ones that stretched and all that stuff,
Do you own any movie or TV show props?
I don't, but my partner has quite a few.
What film scared you as a kid?
Yes. As I said, Rear Window, like crazy. Psycho, of course. And I did see all these things. But the first one I saw in a movie theater, and it was on the night that we moved from an apartment into a house. And I had my own room for the first time. I think it was 5. And it was a tiny room, but with a radiator that made clicking noises that I didn't understand. So I thought it was somebody knocking on the window. And I'd just seen the Vincent Price movie, the one where he has the vat of Oh God.
I think we can just say the Vincent Price
No,
movie.
but it's not. It's oh man, I'm gonna have to look it up. But anyway, he's got a vat of acid in the basement, and he throws bodies in there. Not the haunting.
You saw
of
this
Hill
at
House.
5?
The haunting of Hill House? No, it's not that. Yes, that was the. Oh man.
Yeah, but you saw this at 5 years
Too
old?
much Ambien this week. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's early.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that could explain a lot.
It does. No, I love horror. I loved horror from the beginning.
My last thing for you. Do you remember what it was as a kid that made you fall in love with movies or say, I want to go do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I got a Super 8 camera as a present again when I was like 7 or something like that. And I think it's a way, I think if you feel the least bit alienated from your life or find yourself more an observer than a participant, having a camera is the greatest way to accept that about yourself, and turn it into something. So for me, families were about filming things and funny things and then having my little splicer and editing and showing it and things like that. So I think it was actually the camera.
Sure. On that note, I'm just going to say at the end of the interview here, happy birthday, Bill.
Oh, thank you. And that's enough of that. Yes.
Right. I just want to point out he came in on his birthday, which is awesome.
Yes, and
Good Liar is fantastic.
Oh, great.
I hope it's a big hit for you. And I do think that, as we've talked about, this is a movie aimed at an audience that's really underserved. But I do think it's better than just for an older audience.
Yeah,
It's a really good thriller.
No, yeah, it's
you know.
Yeah.
On that note, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.